Welcome back to the 10X is Easier Than 2X YouTube series. I'm Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I'm an organizational psychologist and best-selling author of multiple books, including 10X is Easier Than 2X with Dan Sullivan. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about going from one level to another. From one level to another is basically going from one 10X to another. And 10X doesn't have to be truly quantitative. It's mostly qualitative. You're going from one level of life to another. And basically that process, you go through it again and again. It's like going through the hero's journey. And this is a quote from Leonardo DiCaprio. Every next level of your life is going to require a different you. I've already talked a lot in this series about how your future self is a different person than you. And once you go 10X, or once you get to a new peak, a fundamentally new level of life, you're going to be a different person, but your life is going to look very different. You're going to have different sets of what Dan Sullivan would call 4 freedoms. You got different quality of time, money, access to relationships, and your sense of purpose and mission will be very different at your next level. But really in this video, and I'm going to share my screen and show you the concept of floor and ceiling, that we all have a floor and we all have a ceiling, and our floor and ceiling are our standards. And to that quote from Leonardo DiCaprio, every level of your life is going to require a different you. There's a great quote that says that lessons are repeated until they're learned. And if you don't learn the lessons of a particular level, then you're going to have to repeat that level. And so this is part of the hero's journey. Part of going 10X or going from one level of life to another is about learning the lessons of that level, which ultimately transform you into the person that can then get to that next level. And then you can actually handle the purpose and the challenges and opportunities of the next level. If you don't learn the lessons of this level, then you're going to ultimately repeat it and you're going to keep going through cycles. One of my all-time favorite quotes is, there are no mistakes in life, only lessons, but lessons are repeated until they're learned. And so a big aspect of the hero's journey, which I equate to going from 10X to 10X to 10X, you go through the hero's journey as many times as you want to. And going through the hero's journey is like peeling away the layers of the onion. Every time you do it, every time you go 10X, every time you go from one level to another, you're peeling more and more layers of the onion, getting deeper and deeper to the core essence of who you are. This fits with the story of Michelangelo when he was asked by the Pope, how did you create the David? He said, I took away everything that's not the David. And so I see your 10X future self or your next level future self as the David. In order to become the David, you've got to strip away everything that's not the David. You got to peel away those layers. And you do that by ultimately learning the lessons of that level and passing the exams. And so just to give a very simple explanation of the hero's journey, basically it starts by you being in what they would call the ordinary world. And that's you right now. There's an ordinary world, there's a normal life. And then you get called to adventure, right? The next step is called to adventure. And I would say that that's called to that higher level, called to that next opportunity. And we could all argue back and forth about where that call comes from, whether it comes from God, whether it comes from yourself. I think it's a combination of the two. But in any case, if you hear things, and every person could get this call to adventure, call to a higher level, call to that next opportunity. But once you hear that, you have that sense, that desire that you want to be, do, and have more in your life. You want to go to a next level. The next step of the hero's journey is that you will resist that call. And in the parlance of this book of 10X is Easier Than 2X, I talk a lot about the 80 and the 20. And in order to go 10X, you got to identify the 20% that's going to get you there and go deep on that. And you've got to let go of the 80%. The resistance to the call, in my opinion, is continuing to go into the 80% and avoiding the 20% and going deep on the 20% and owning the 20% and owning the call, owning your future self and learning the lesson. A fundamental aspect of learning the lesson is letting go of the 80%. This is the core model of the book found in chapter 1 of the book. So a 2X mindset or a 2X goal means you can keep 80% of your life, 80% of existing. A 10X vision of your future self or a call to that next level of adventure is going to require you to go all in on just the 20% and make this 10 times better and to let go of the 80%. And so to the idea of you get the call to adventure, that's your 10X future self. That's you at the next level. That's what you most deeply want, but you fear you will fail. And so you ultimately resist the call. You stay in your 80%, whatever that may be. It may be your cushy job. It could be the distractions on YouTube. It could be addictions. It could be whatever. And again, I'm going to show you a model that's different than this that kind of just shows the idea of lessons are repeated until learned, and that you have to go through peaks and valleys to learn that lesson. But the main thing I want to show you here is that your call to adventure, your next life, your next level, which is you at a fundamentally different place and as a different person with different quality of time, money, relationships, and purpose, different freedoms, and just you at your own next level. You're going to have to become a different person. Your future self is a different person than you. And so to take that call to adventure, which I'm calling your 10X future self, you're going to have to ultimately go deep into the 20% that really matters and then transform that and yourself into the 10X higher quality version, quality, not quantity. And so you're going to have to let go of the 80%, and letting go of the 80% is equivalent to raising your floor. A big aspect of identity is it's your floor and your ceiling. A lot of people focus on the ceiling. What I'm saying is you should focus on the floor and stripping away the 80%, which is your floor, which is the standards that are okay in the present, but don't meet the standards of your 10x future self. They don't meet the standards of the call that are your next adventure. So this is the idea of floor and ceiling. And the main thing I want you to hear here is that every level of your life, every 10x adventure, every 10x journey is going to require that you learn certain lessons. And lessons are repeated until they're learned, and you won't pass through the 10x until you learn all the lessons. One of the other key components of the hero's journey is that you'll ultimately develop mentors and stuff like that, or partners. The idea that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. If you watch any film, for example, Star Wars, Luke will eventually get Yoda, right? And then at some point, he's got to learn his lessons. But one big part of these lessons is that final exam. And that final exam is where you have to go deep into the inner cave of yourself and, ultimately let go of traumas or learn certain lessons or realize certain patterns that are keeping you going in circles. And so just to the idea of floor and ceiling, we all have a floor, we all have a ceiling. And the point is to raise the floor. When you raise the floor, you're essentially raising your standard. You're starting to say no to things you used to say yes to, and you're filtering out that 80%. That could be bad habits. And you can do this in all ways. And in fact, we often do it in all ways. I actually love the quote, how you do one thing is how you do all things. And so as you're raising your floor in one area, in other words, as you're raising the quality of what you do in one area, you'll often want to do it in the same, because as we do one thing, as we do all things. As an example, you could raise your floor or your standards or the quality of what you say yes to and what you say no to, for example, in your eating or in how you spend your time or in the level of work you do, the quality of work you do, the depth of work you do, the level of your relationships. And so you could look at how you've raised your floor. And as you raise your floor, you begin to have higher levels of integrity towards your future self, towards who you want to be, towards where you want. And as you raise your floor, you're essentially stripping away the aspects of your past self that no longer fit. Your past self had a floor down here, meaning a standard down here, meaning you said yes to things down here, and now you're raising that floor. You're raising the requirement, the standard, the quality of what you say yes to, and you're doing less but better, higher quality, less quantity. And as you raise the floor, this transforms you at the subconscious level, because raising your floor is really about peeling away the subconscious and letting go of your past self. Robert Keegan, the Harvard psychologist, he wrote an amazing book called Immunity to Change. And basically what he said is whenever you want to make some change in your life, you want to go to that next level, you're going to ultimately have a resistance to that change. It's kind of like the resistance to the call. Keegan calls that immunity to change, where you have a built-in system. The system is designed to defend the system. You have a built-in system that's designed to stop you from the changes you want. And that system is your subconscious. Your subconscious is you on autopilot. It's your floor. It's your past self. That is your subconscious. And so in order to become your future self, you're going to have to strip it away at the subconscious level, which is about peeling away the layers of your floor. No longer saying yes to those emotionally secure things, those bad habits, those certain friends. You have a floor in terms of the people you surround yourself with. And so you're going to raise that floor in all ways. The quality of how you do one thing is going to be the quality of how you do all things. And as you begin raising this floor and letting go of the things that no longer fit, you begin having greater integrity towards your future self. And as you develop that greater integrity on an emotional level, on a subconscious level, you shift to believing you can have and deserve 10 times higher things than you can have now. You start to emotionally connect with the next level future self. With that call, you begin to get to going from thinking to ultimately feeling to knowing. One of my favorite quotes comes from Dr. David Hawkins in his book, Letting Go. He says, your unconscious will only allow you to have what you believe you deserve. And getting to that level of higher deserve level, it occurs by raising your floor and by stripping away those hidden commitments. You become aware of those hidden commitments by being honest about your behaviors. If you catch yourself always scrolling on social media, that behavior is driven by a hidden commitment. That hidden commitment might be that whenever our work gets hard, I'm going to avoid difficulty or whatnot. We've all developed hidden commitments in our past, and those hidden commitments are our past self and our subconscious, and ultimately you want to strip those away. And so as you raise your floor, you have greater integrity towards your future self, which means that subconsciously and emotionally you believe you'll deserve enormously higher. You'll start to go from thinking to feeling, where you start to then get to the place of knowing, where you know that that's who you are. And then, you just start to be your future self now. And one of the ways I look at this, and one of my favorite books on the subject, is called Peaks and Valleys by Spencer Johnson. And in Spencer Johnson's book, Peaks and Valleys, he just simply talks about how all of our lives are peaks and valleys. It's like a heart rate. You don't want a heart rate to go flatline, and the peaks are just as important as the valleys. And one of the challenges he talks about is that the mistakes most people make are on their peaks. Once you start making progress, you start growing forth, often if you're not raising your floor along the way, you're going to revert back. You might start making more money than you've ever made, and you'll start blowing it on stuff that doesn't matter. As things get better, unless we're learning the lessons along the way, and I would just equate these to the lessons along the way, if you don't learn those lessons, then you're going to revert down to the level of your lessons. And the level of your lessons is your floor. The level of your lessons is your subconscious. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have peaks and valleys. You're going to start progressing, and then you're going to ultimately revert because you haven't learned certain lessons. And so one of the things that Spencer Johnson talks about in that book is that the great things happen in your life because of what you do and what you learn in your valleys. And so going through valleys is going to be part of the process. Sometimes you're going to go through really hard, challenging experiences, and you can either say, why is this happening to me? Or you can say, this is happening for me. And if you approach life that everything is happening for you, then you can ultimately turn every experience into what Dan and I call a gain. You can take every experience and gain from it. You can use everything as fuel for becoming your future self. You can use everything as post-traumatic growth and ultimately lessons. And so this is the process of learning lessons. And as you learn the lessons, you'll raise your floor, which will raise your ceiling, and lessons are repeated until they're learned. Every next level of your life is going to require you to become a different person. And the process of becoming that new person is about ultimately raising your floor, raising the quality of what you do and the specificity of what you do and who you are, and operating from your future self and letting your future self become the standard, taking what you thought was your ceiling and turning it into your floor and learning the lessons along the way. And one thing I will say, and this fits with the hero's journey, is that idea of the final exam. And it also fits with the idea that I've shared many times in this, that it's the quote from Aristotle, that nature abhors a vacuum. And so as you're stripping away that 80%, and as you're ultimately creating space and ultimately internalizing the lessons of your future self and raising the floor, raising the vision and the quality of who you can be and what you can do, a lot of things are going to come in. So the idea of necessity abhors a vacuum is that when there's a vacuum, when there's empty space, it will be filled. So if there's an empty plot of dirt, weeds will grow. And so part of the final exam and part of learning the lessons is that things are going to present themselves to you that are going to test you. They're going to test if you're really ready for the next level. This often happens, by the way, on a spiritual level when people are like on a process of spiritual conversion. Right before they're about to fully convert, often they will go through crazy things. It could be like crazy challenges, trials, and stuff like that, or tests, but it doesn't have to be negative things. Often highly compelling and exciting things will present themselves to you that would invite you to accept them and are actually the final exam of that level. And you'll have to know, you got to have the discernment. Is this what you ultimately want? Or is this some distraction that you're going to take out of short-term security or ego or some lower level? And so every next level of life is going to require a different you. And the process is ultimately learning the lessons of that level. And as you learn the lessons of that level, which is going to be a peaks and valleys process, it's never a flat line. It's always peaks and valleys. All things are good for you. The peaks are good for you. The valleys are good for you. All things happen for you, not to you. But the point is to learn those lessons and ultimately to pass the exam so that when you get to that next level, you're now ready to handle the responsibility, the opportunities, and you'll actually be able to seize those moments because you've passed the lessons and won't need to needlessly revert back to the old level. One thing I will say, and this is something I've caught myself on many times, there's many lessons that I have not learned, which I'm continuing to repeat, which are stopping me from going 10x. And there are many lessons that you're still repeating, which represent your 80% and you being in the floor and you doing things as your past self did them, not as your future self requires that they happen. Not at the standard of your future self, but you're sticking at the standard of your current self and hoping that that standard will get you there, and it won't. Oftentimes, people will get really, really close to finishing this level. Say this is one level, this is a 10x, and then this opens up the next level. Often people will get really, really close to this level, but they skipped some of the lessons along the way, and it will get exposed. And ultimately, they end up having to, because they don't learn the lessons, whether through peaks and valleys, they don't learn the lesson, they end up having to repeat this level. And you often have to start back over and get the lessons you ultimately tried to skip. And I've seen people do this. Even one of my really good friends recently sold his company. And a lot of things ultimately faltered near the end of the selling. And he said, his partners and stuff didn't learn the lessons of that level, which ultimately resulted in the result not being as good as it could have been. He learned the lessons, and so he's going to go to the next level, but his partners in this case didn't, and so they're honestly going to have to repeat the level. And the repeating of the level might be 5 years. It could be a decade. It could be 1 year if you learn the lessons really aggressively, but a lot of that learning the lessons is about raising that floor, which is about purging out your past self. It's about evolving yourself and evolving and learning the lessons and ultimately passing the exams that your past self wouldn't have passed. It's about saying no to the things that your past self would have taken out of lower levels of consciousness, out of seeking approval or trying to be better than other people. If the purpose isn't deeply intrinsic and truly what you deeply want, but if it's for some other reason, to beat someone else or to prove yourself, then you're going to repeat the cycle and not learn the lesson. So every level of your life is going to require a different you. Lessons are repeated until they're learned. And part of that 10x process of getting to your next life, getting to your next level is basically going through the hero's journey and then doing it again and again and again. There's going to be peaks and valleys along the way. The purpose of all of those things is for you to internalize and develop the lessons and the skills, the abilities, so that at each next level you can handle and take on higher levels of responsibility that you could have never taken without learning those lessons. And often you will try to skip those lessons. And when you do, as you make your process towards a peak, you will inevitably crash into a valley that's going to force you to learn those lessons, or you can continue to avoid those lessons, and then you'll have to repeat the cycle until you learn it. Raising the floor is part of the process of transforming your identity, and the key is to take what you perceive as your peak and ultimately make that your floor. When you make something your floor, you've normalized it. And by the way, if you look at your own life, you have done this in many ways. What if you are someone especially who's reached any levels of success in your life, there was a point when you had a vision of your future self, a standard, and you've now normalized that. So now it's your normal life. Now it's your standard. Now it's your floor. The point now is to take what you see as your ceiling, what you most want, and to make that your floor, to make that your standard. And once you make that your standard and you let go of all the hidden commitments and you evolve your subconscious to that level, then you will normalize that. You'll have learned the lessons. Then you'll be ready for what the next level has, which right now is beyond your comprehension. Talk to you later.